Hi everyone. I know it's a little early. We aren't scheduled to start for a few minutes yet, but since we have a full house, Craig said he was open to starting early, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and that way we'll have a few more minutes at the end if we have questions or if we want to take the topic any further. So my name is Samantha Sunny. I'm the managing editor of MisinfoCon, which is a group of anti-misinformation researchers, scientists, and civil society enthusiasts. We are doing a series of sessions here in the Sala de la Colón at the International Journalism Festival. And we have one more session after this, which I encourage you to stick around for. It will be a live panel at 5 p.m. about free expression for local journalists. Just a few announcements before I pass it over to Craig. We are doing questions at this conference over a tool called Slido. If you have been at the conference before this, you might be familiar with it already, but you can access it at the URL sli.do. And we have the information for accessing this question form on our website, which is perugia.misinfocon.com. You can also find it on our MisinfoCon Twitter account, or you can also find that just simply by Googling MisinfoCon itself. You can also find the full schedule of our MisinfoCon sessions at that website. And we encourage you throughout this session and the next one, if you want to tweet, we would love if you would tag MisinfoCon, either using our handle, MisinfoCon, or the hashtag MisinfoCon. With that said, I'm going to introduce our workshop for 3:30. Craig Silverman is a national reporter at ProPublica, and he will be talking about exposing people and funding behind websites and digital ads.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It was crazy to walk in here and you're all set up and waiting. And this is great because starting early is good. There's a lot to get through, and this way we can definitely have some time for discussion at the end. So as you see up here, one, you've got access to my slides, and I strongly encourage you to just save that link. So it's bit.ly/sites and ads. Because I'm talking about a bunch of tools, I'm talking about a bunch of websites and services that you can use, and everything that I am going to be talking about today is either a completely free tool or a tool that has at the very least a free version that is useful, okay? Now, a lot of them are just in English. I apologize for that, but some of them are available in English, so please, stand up and ask a question. We will get to them if I spot it at the time as I'm talking about it, or we will talk about them at the end. All right? Does everybody have a photo of this and everything?
Più tetti da riparare, più case da pulire, più caldaie.
Having just mentioned that I am going to be sharing a bunch of tools and approaches with you, tools are not the most important thing to take away from this session today, and in fact, tools are not the most important thing when it comes to doing journalism as a whole or doing digital investigative work. Tools can sometimes help us answer questions. Tools can sometimes be useful in speeding up our process, but at the end of the day, it's about knowing which questions to ask. It's about our mindset of being thorough and investigative, and that is the most important thing. So I just want to say that off the top because I am going to show a lot of tools, but tools come and go. Sometimes they go out of business or they stop working or what have you. And if you are only doing work reliant on tools, then you are going to end up in trouble. Okay, so there are two sections to the workshop today. First section, I'm going to talk a little bit about investigating websites with an eye towards trying to figure out who is running it, and can we also start connecting that website perhaps to other websites being run by the same people or entities. And then the second part is about digital ads, and I'm going to spend more time on digital ads because I think it's probably one of the least understood elements that journalists are actually trying to do reporting and investigations about. And even what I'm going to go through today is just like a tiny amount of stuff related to digital ads, but I'm going to show you some ways to get started and to understand some basics about ads on websites, and it will work a little bit as well for mobile too, okay? So let's talk about websites. Here is kind of a rundown of of some of the approaches when I visit a website and I'm interested in it for a journalistic perspective, of the things that I think about. But the takeaway here is that we are not just passive visitors to a website. We are not just kind of going to a website and being like, oh, what do they say here? What do they say there? We're trying to be systematic about going through the website, about clicking on as many links as possible, visiting as many sections of it, as many pages as possible, seeing what the website is telling us about itself. So, is there an about page? Who do they say is involved? Is there no about page? Is that weird that they don't have an about page? And things that I always pay close attention to are privacy policies, disclaimers, terms and conditions. Any stuff that seems like a boring legalese page, you absolutely want to go and you want to visit. And one of the reasons for that is sometimes they may list some information on an about page. Maybe they list, a name of a company, a person. Maybe there's nothing there. But sometimes you go and you look in their terms and conditions, you go and you look in their privacy policy, and it lists a completely other corporate entity. It lists an address. It lists an email that is not listed anywhere else on the website. Maybe that's because they copied it and pasted it from somebody else and it's a dead end, or maybe that's because that's the legal part and they actually had to put real information there while they're trying to obscure things on the rest of the website. Now, not every website is necessarily trying to mislead you, of course, but the fact is that sometimes people forget to update, old information. Maybe they own multiple companies and they're copying information from one of their company websites to another, and they forget to sort of replace the name of the new company. And maybe that's a way for you to connect two companies together that don't otherwise, that you wouldn't have otherwise known was, reaching the same person or connected to the same entity. So going through a website, reading it very systematically, reading it with an idea of extracting people, companies, lists of other websites, other social profiles connected to it, to start building out, this larger framework. So that's one of the things we look at, and I do often love, if the about text is kind of generic, I often will take a sentence or two of it, put that in quotes, and search it in Google to see if they copied and pasted their about text from somewhere else. This is, by the way, something that's very common on e-commerce sites. People are running hundreds of Shopify sites to scam people or rip people off, and they often just, generate them and copy and paste the same about text every time. So Googling a little bit of text can, is such a simple thing, but can often be helpful. One of the fundamental things when we're thinking about, okay, so, who is behind a site, is to do what's called a who is search. So anyone who buys a domain name, that domain name, some details of it are stored in, the sort of central registry of domain names. And you sometimes get good information from this, and sometimes you kind of come up empty, and I'm going to show you an example of sort of, what you can get there. But the bottom line is that everyone who registers and buys a domain name, there is information about that stored in a central database. And there are different tools that can help you access that information. So this is one of those tools. It's called whoisology.com. It has a free version, but there are also paid versions for it where you can get more information. And sometimes you can pay for a specific report on a domain, which is something you may want to do if it's really important to the work you're doing. And so I'm just using a website. This is a website. It's a Filipino-Canadian website, maharlikanews.com, that I had looked at for a previous workshop. And so I searched maharlikanews.com in Whoisology, and let's take a look at the kind of records we can get. So here's the takeaway from this is they have paid, whoever owns this website, has paid a few extra dollars to make their information private. And so if you remember, I said, sometimes you get really good information, sometimes not so good. Well, a lot of times when you do a who is search on a domain name, you're going to see information like this, where it says, registration private. In this case, in the org section, it says domains by proxy. That's a company that offers a domain privacy service. And so you will see the name of the service provider. And there's lots of different ones. They're based all over the world. I wouldn't read too much into the location of that. In this case, Domains by Proxy is a US service. There's very popular ones based in Panama, based in Russia, based all over the world. It doesn't necessarily indicate that whoever paid for this privacy service is based in the same location as that privacy service, because I've seen articles published where someone actually reports, well, this is clearly a Russia-linked website because they used a Russian domain privacy service. Don't do that. So in this case, domains by proxy, registration private, not really a great help for us. But you can use more than one service, right? And like I say, these will come and go. Some have really good data at certain times, and then other times, other services are better. So there's another one called domainbigdata.com, all right? So if we put Maharlika News in domainbigdata.com, this is what sort of the top of the information looks like. And once again, we can see under registrant, it says registration private, domains by proxy. One piece of information that you always get with a whois search is what we see in the top there. We can see date creation 2016-02-12. So February 12th of 2016 was when the current owner of this domain registered it. You will always get that information, okay? That is never private, that is never concealed. You will always at the very least be able to know, okay, when was this domain sort of most recently registered? It does not tell you the first time this domain name was ever bought and ever registered. That is telling you of the kind of current owner of it, this is when they bought it, okay? So it seems like we struck out here, but domain big data, we can actually scroll further down the page. And again, there's the privacy info. It offers sometimes, this is like the caveat I'm going to keep giving you today, is sometimes when you do a domain search for whoisology or domain big data, sometimes they may actually give you a little hint of all this other data they keep behind the paywall, okay? And in this case, we can see that they're telling us, we've been watching this domain registration record for many years, and we can see that back in January 30th of 2017, you can see it says recorded at the very top there. It's showing that it was still registered to this privacy service. So it's, it's showing us, look, we've got records going back in time. Back in 2017, less than or roughly a year after it got registered, it was already private. And the reason why historical records are so useful is that when people first buy a domain, they don't always know what they're going to do with it. They don't always know, I'm going to scam people with this or whatever, right? And so a lot of times they'll be like, I don't want to pay the extra few dollars for privacy because I'm just buying this domain. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'm just going to hold on to it for now. And so because these services take little snapshots, daily, hourly in some cases, of domain records, you can sometimes go back in time and see the original date of creation record and see the person's name before they decided to pay for privacy. And domain big data actually helps us out here because for free, it's showing us a historical record from February 13th, 2016, so the day after they say that this current owner registered it, and we get someone's name. We get a guy, and we get the name of an organization, okay? So if you only use one domain privacy service or domain registration search, if you only went to whoisology for this, you would have thought you would struck out, right? So we want to, as much as possible, just like we're visiting the website, we're clicking on all the links, we're visiting everywhere, we're going to go to all the free services we could possibly look at to see if any of them are going to help us. Maybe you're lucky and your newsroom pays for access to one of these, or maybe if the domain is really important to a story, you will get permission to buy the historical records. But for free, sometimes you can still get good information. So figuring out who owns a website, one of the first things that we want to do, aside from visiting it and looking at it very carefully, is we do a whois search. Now here's the other thing that you always get in a domain record. You get the IP address. And I'm not going to get into like a technical description here, so hopefully I'm going to give a basic description that is also still technically accurate, which is, every website, there's images, there's text, there's all the stuff that loads, right, when you pull it up. That has to be hosted somewhere. And so when you type in your web browser, maharlikanews.com, your computer has to know where to go to get that information from the website to have it pulled up. And so it's going to go and find the address on the internet where all those files are, where that website is hosted, and that is the IP address. It is linked to a physical server somewhere in the world that hosts all of the files and all the images for that website, okay? Every website has to have an IP address, has to be hosted somewhere. And you will always be able to see the current IP address of where that website is hosted. This is kind of like its address on the internet. There's the domain name, but that has to be translated into like, where do we go to find all the files? And so sometimes you get really lucky because the IP address can be a great avenue for further investigation, okay? And I'm going to give a little more detail on this in a second, but the rule that I follow on IP addresses is that the fewer the number of websites that are hosted and appear at the same IP address, the more interesting they are to you, okay? Now, a lot of times on a server, there can literally be like thousands or tens of thousands of websites. And so that's not interesting to us. It's a server that's hosting a lot of websites. The chances that the same person owns all those websites, I mean, it's possible. There are people that own a lot of domain names, but that's not a great signal for us to figure that out, okay? So if you see the IP address and you click on it, as you can on Domain Big Data, and start to see some information about it, if there's a relatively small number of websites hosted on that same IP address, and if you look at the domain names, and they're all about a similar topic, or they're variations of the same name, that might start to be indications that, I wonder if all of the websites hosted on this server are actually owned by the same person or same company. And that does happen. Sometimes people rent a specific server and all their stuff is hosted on there, or they work with a hosting provider and that host decides to put all of their sites together. And in this case, we get a pretty good indication because there are only 2 websites hosted on this same IP address, okay? So we have Maharlika News and we have something I'm not even going to try to pronounce, news. And so this is like, only 2 sites on this IP address. I wonder if these sites may be owned by the same person, may be owned by the same company. And so what would we do? Well, we'd want to visit the other website, right? We want to see if there are any similarities. We want to see if they say it's owned by, the same guy. I think it's called Creative Mark Interactive or something like that. And we would want to see if we can start to actually build a case that there are connections between these websites. Last thing to note on this is if you end up doing a who is search and you come up completely empty on getting someone's name associated with it, but you get an IP address that has 5 or 10 sites on it, it's probably worth looking at the who is records of all of those websites hosted on that same IP, because maybe they're owned by the same person and maybe they didn't pay for privacy on all of those websites. So we try to think about ways of moving to the side. Okay, so we struck out on the website we're interested in, but there's 8 websites hosted on the same IP. They seem to be about similar topics. What if we who is search all of those 7 other domains, and maybe we get a name on one of them, and maybe we can start to work backwards from that or forward from that to connect them back together. So always trying to think of other ways in and around and combining things. So in this case, if you visit the 2 sites, they're using basically the exact same design template, a simple one probably from WordPress. And so that's kind of interesting. And actually, if you visit, and I just did these screenshots this morning, they had the exact same article with the exact same headline that was rotating through their homepage display there. So that's a pretty good indicator that perhaps these are run by the same people. And then when I went to the bottom of Atenito News, we saw that the footer, which, if you remember, I said how to read a website, look at the footer, look at all the pages. It says maintained by Creative Mark Interactive. So we've got our registration information from Maharlika News, which had Creative Mark Interactive and a guy's name back when it was originally registered. Then we see that that site is hosted on the same IP address as another website. We see that website, when we visit it, has the same company name in its footer. And then we could also do a who is search on it. And so we start to try and stack our evidence of what the connections are. And, and because we don't want to do a story just saying, well, they're hosted on the same IP. That's one piece of connection, but that wouldn't necessarily be enough for attribution, right? And so we're trying to find the connection, establish the connection, and then to continue to build that out to the point where we have multiple points of connection, and where obviously we call somebody up and we say, hey, do you run all these sites? And we see what they say about that. And if they say, no, I don't, then you ask, well, why is your company name at the footer of this website? And why, are they hosted on the same IP? And then you're able to sort of go back to them if they're denying that, because you've built up the connections and the evidence. So that's the first part with who is searches, essential part of figuring out who is behind a website that we always want to do, and then we combine that with visiting and finding other clues and cues to connect websites together. Here's a list of other kinds of questions that you might have and you want answers to when you're looking at a website, and different services and tools that I'm recommending you use there. I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, which is why I wanted to give you the slides off the top. Hopefully this is a helpful resource for you that you can sort of go back to, be like, okay, I'm really interested in this website. I want to know how much traffic they're getting. And you can look at this and say like, oh, I can get a free traffic report on a website from SimilarWeb. The free report you get from SimilarWeb goes back about 3 months. It will tell you their estimate of how many people visit it per month. It will tell you where that traffic comes from. Is it coming from Facebook? Is it coming from searches on Google? It will tell you similar websites that people might be visiting before or after they visit that website. And so here's a bunch of tips and other things to access. The other one that two things I want to call out here. So one of them is, I hope people are familiar with the Wayback Machine, which is the Internet Archive archiving just billions and billions of web pages. You can look and enter the website you're interested in and see if they have older versions of it. Again, to find out who is involved with the website, I will often go and look at the earliest version of the About page to see if that had different information when it first was being archived at that time versus now. Sometimes people start, they put their name, they put a company name on it, the mission changes over time, and maybe they're like, I don't know if I want to directly link myself anymore. So looking at those historical records is helpful, but there is especially a super helpful and great and recently redesigned browser plugin for the Wayback Machine. If you are not using the Wayback Machine Chrome browser plugin, I really strongly encourage you to install that. With a click of a button, you can see if the page you're on has older versions. You can also instantly screenshot the page you're on to save that in the archive. Lots of really great, useful things with the Wayback Machine browser plugin. I also recommend the CrowdTangle browser plugin, which is linked here, which is a way if you're on a specific web page to see if it has been shared by like public Facebook pages in public Facebook groups, on Twitter in the past 7 days. Just some helpful tools to kind of understand more about who is sharing content. All right, let me take a quick look at Slido here before. Nobody has a question? You guys don't want a Slido? Come on, send me some stuff. Okay, last one I was going to note here is just the one on the bottom there. At the NICAR Journalism Conference in the US, there was a fantastic presentation all about investigating websites. And so that GitHub link there on the very bottom, really, really good tip sheet. It's actually done as a checklist of things you want to look at when you're investigating a website, and they have some really, really great tips there. Okay, so I strongly encourage you look at that and visit that. Just a reminder, if you want to ask questions, there's the Slido info. And as I said, we were going to go through websites relatively quickly. The most fundamental thing around, of seeing who's behind a website, you always absolutely need to do a who is search, but there's, other ways to start connecting websites together, other ways to sort of connect them to people. And I'm going to use digital ads now as an avenue for trying to figure out who is behind a website, and also trying to figure out if they're connected to other websites and how they make money. I think digital ads is probably one of the most important yet under-investigated areas of the digital ecosystem, and that's why I wanted to spend some time on it now. Okay, so here's some background on the digital advertising industry. This is a massive global business. Around the world, it has sort of tipped, so now there is more advertising money spent on digital ads than on traditional ads, so TV and other things like that. So it is traditionally on the web been the way that most or many websites are funding themselves. It has traditionally been the way that news websites are funding themselves. Obviously, subscriptions and other things like that have become more popular and more important, and many news organizations are trying to diversify revenue and all this. It's all true, but advertising is still the thing that keeps the lights on for a lot of newsrooms, and also for a lot of other people in the sort of world of information and publishing. Not everything on the internet is news, obviously, and there's lots that's being monetized through ads. Google and Facebook take the biggest share of digital ad revenue in the entire world. Some countries they're more dominant than others. Google is the biggest, Facebook is second. Together, they gobble up an insane amount, which is, has been bad news for your local newspaper, right? That ads that used to flow there are now going to them. But they are behemoths in this, and Google in particular, it doesn't just dominate in terms of getting the most money, it is the biggest, but Google is involved or dominant in just about every part of the digital ads technology ecosystem. So every tool that advertisers use to place and buy ads, all the way through to those ads getting placed, all the way through to publishers making their inventory available to have ads placed on it, Google is part of all of that, and it has the dominant tools in a bunch of those key areas. So when we end up investigating digital advertising, Google often becomes inevitably something that pops up, as we'll see. And just, the other thing to keep about is keep in mind in terms of investigating digital ads, one of the reasons we want to do it, of course, is if we're interested in an organization, it helps us understand how they're funding themselves or something like that. But there's often a lot of rules that brands have about where they want their ads to appear and where they don't want their ads to appear, which is this world called brand safety. They work with providers to block their ads from certain websites. If there's certain text on a page, they may not want their ad to appear on that page. But the truth is that a lot of times, in spite of what the brand wants, their ads still appear on tons of places that they are surprised by. And I've done lots of stories about brands showing up on extremist websites filled with disinformation, and you call up the brands that have appeared on there, and they are just shocked to learn that their ad could appear there because that website was supposed to be on their block list. This is just one example of how completely screwed up the digital ads ecosystem is. You have people spending literally billions of dollars on ads a year, and they have no clue where their ads are ending up. And that is completely unprecedented in the history of advertising, because usually it was a direct relationship. I run a company, I want to buy ads, I choose this magazine and this newspaper, and we're going to be on this radio program. Digital ads have completely upended that. They are trying to have their ads placed in a real-time auction environment to be placed in split seconds or milliseconds in front of somebody who displays the attributes of the kind of person they want their ad appearing in front of. They are, a woman between the age of 18 and 25 who has indicated an interest in X, Y, Z. So they're targeting based on profile, not necessarily based on, the publication or, the audience that a certain media entity has for them. And that has just created a whole bunch of screw-ups. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I see some questions coming in, which is great. I will pause and take a look at these. So the two types of ads we're going to look at are display and content ads. Okay, and I'm going to show you examples of them in a second if you're wondering what they are. One of the key things to know is display ads, which are your typical kind of banner ads that you see on websites and mobile apps. They are typically bought and sort of compensated by impressions. So the number of times that ad loads and a human is determined to have viewed it, which by the way is complete junk, the way they measure this stuff, that is an impression. And so advertisers are usually paying per 1,000 impression to show their ads to someone. When it comes to content ads, which are those kind of skeezy kind of ads you often see saying, from around the web or related content, those are typically sort of purchased and compensated in pay-per-click. So it's not enough to just show that ad to someone. The person has to click on it, and then the money changes hands, okay? And this is why there's a whole world of fraudulent clicks and all this stuff, because money changes hands in a greater degree in the world of advertising when people are actually clicking on the ads, okay? So display ads typically per impression, content ads typically per click. And you will often see, as we'll see in a second, websites and mobile apps and publishers in general, they will work with lots of different ad partners. They will have different types of ad units and ads on their websites. And it's all about trying to optimize a way to earn the most possible money from your audience. And so this is why sometimes you go to a website and you'll notice there's just ads all over the page, and it's kind of squeezing out the content. They're just trying to get as much money, wring as much money out of each page as possible. And last thing is, remember that digital ads are personalized and they are targeted. And so the ads that you see when you go to a website are being targeted at you based on things like your browsing history, whether you're logged in and that data and that site has what's called first-party data about you, meaning that they know it's Craig Silverman visiting the site because I have an account there. So don't necessarily extrapolate that the ads you saw on that website are the ads that everyone else is going to see on that website, okay? Keep that in mind always. All right, so basics, first thing, the 101 thing for digital ads. How do we identify ads on a page and know how they're being placed and where they're coming from? So this is another site in the Philippines called the Daily Sentry. And so this is the page if you visit it without an ad blocker turned on. And obviously we have an ad unit right here, right? And this is a display ad unit. It's the traditional kind of banner ad we can see there. Now, how would we know more about how this ad got placed on the page? The beautiful thing here is there's a standard called ad choices where ads are supposed to actually give you, with just the hovering of a mouse or the click of a button, information about how that ad appeared on the website and why it's being shown to you. And it's pretty simple. If you see in the upper right-hand corner of this ad, there's a little X and there's a little triangle next to it. So the triangle is your ad choices button. If you click on that, there they are. It's going to open up something like this. And it's going to tell you how this ad got placed on the page. Okay? So this is one way to start understanding who the ad partners are that a publisher is working with. In this case, the ad was placed. Criteo is the ad tech company that placed the ad. They are not the advertiser. If you remember, the brand was something different. And by the way, it's in German. I just thought I'd make it very international here in different languages. So we have a website in the Philippines. We have an ad in German because I was at the Frankfurt airport when I decided to load the site for this. And so in this case, the ad that was shown to me was placed by Criteo. And the moment that I loaded this page, information gathered from cookies in my browser was transmitted to basically a real-time auction environment where Criteo helped broker the placement of this ad to be shown to me based on criteria that they knew about me from this advertiser who, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to reach someone with my attributes. And this all happened in milliseconds. And this happens all the time, every day, billions of times every day to place ads all over the web. And it is a very technical and opaque and poorly understood process. It is also a process that is rife with fraud and exploitation, which is also a reason why it's good for journalists to be able to look into this. And so that's one of the ways we can see sort of the ad and who this site is working with. Here's another example. When I loaded the same site this morning here in Italy, and in this case, I can just hover over the little eye icon there. You see where I have the arrow pointing, and it's telling me that this ad was actually placed via Google. And so at any given moment, there's different partners helping place ads on these websites, and these give you indications of who the website is working with. In this case, it's an Alibaba ad targeted at me. Now, there are these ads on the side here. These are content ads. So these are the you may like or the from around the web or related content ads. They're often, very clickbaity. They're often for dubious financial offerings and health offerings. And why do publishers have them on their site? Because of the money. They know that these are ads that often annoy people, and some publishers will just run insane amounts of them on their page. But a lot of times, these companies that provide these ads will actually give publishers guarantees of a certain amount of revenue per year. They were cutting them a check even before the ads had ever been clicked on and placed on their website, guaranteeing them that they would make, hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to place these ads on their sites. And so, the way these ad networks make their money is they work with the publishers. They have to split some of the money with the publisher, but people are paying to place these ads. And if you click on these ads, then money changes hands. So you can see here it says you may like, and then to the right of that it says sponsored links. So even though they look like content and related articles, they are ads. And if you scroll to the bottom, it tells you who is placing these, and it's Taboola. The two biggest players in content ads are Taboola and Outbrain, both companies originally based in Israel. Taboola, I think, is now officially based in the US. And then there are others kind of below them with different company names. I would just say, like, if you find the Taboola and Outbrain ads sometimes a little bit clickbaity, if you see one of the other lower quality ad networks on here, like, the quality degrades very quickly. And so, usually more reputable publishers tend to be with Taboola and Outbrain. And if you start going down the value chain and it's like lower quality content ads, that may be an indication that Taboola and Outbrain have booted these guys out of their network. Similarly, if you don't see anything from Google on a site, most sites are working with Google in some way. That may be an indication that Google kicked them out as well, okay? So just visiting a site, hovering over those icons, clicking on the ad choices icon, paying attention to the sidebar where the content ads are, we can start to figure out who some of the partners are. Pretty simple and straightforward. And at the bottom of the article, there was another Taboola unit where it was basically like an infinite scroll. They call it the Taboola feed, where if you just keep scrolling down the page, there will be links to other articles on that same publisher's website, but most of it is just ads, and they're just hoping you're going to click on something. I would really encourage you to use this wonderful tool from the markup, and I know there's someone here from the markup. Aaron's here from the markup. Hi, Aaron. So let me give a shout out to them. This is a fantastic tool. It's free. There's the link up top. It's called Blacklight. Basically, you can put in the URL of any website, and you get a report of all of the different types of trackers. These are like, this is the code that is on the web page to help place ads, to help measure the traffic coming to the site. This tells you all of the different trackers found on the particular website you're interested in, the different types of third-party cookies for like tracking you from one site to the next, and then it lists all of the ad tech companies that a site interacts with. And so it's telling you all of these sort of the companies that are potential direct or third-party partners of this particular website publisher. And it can be a lot. And in this case, we see Criteo is listed there, right? They're able to place an ad on the site in front of me because Criteo has basically some code on this publisher's website where it can cycle through in an auction. And maybe the auction first went to Google because Google typically pays better than a lot of other people. And maybe Google couldn't find an advertiser who wanted to show me an ad, and it cycled through to their different partners. And eventually Criteo was like, hey, I got somebody who wants to show an ad to this guy. And then that ad gets what's called filled. Now it's possible sometimes you visit a website and not every ad slot has an ad in it. And there's an auction that's taken place. And for whatever reason, they weren't able to fill that slot. And so, a big thing for publishers is fill rate. They want as many ads filled as possible, and they want ads that are filled at the highest CPM as possible in display ads. So the advertisers have paid the most possible money to show that ad to a person. And this is what publishing ad executives are always trying to do. They're trying to figure out the right kind of balance of which partners to work with to get the most money for every visit to their website. And it's something that is constantly being tweaked. So Blacklight, again, there's the link. Check it out, use it. If this is also, you can click on any of these partners and they describe to you what the company does. So if you're trying to get grounded in digital advertising, and the stuff I'm talking about, like auctions and all that, sounds really confusing, this is one of the ways to learn more about digital advertising is use Blacklight, run it on different sites, see who their partners are, and see what those partners do. It's a great way to get up to speed on digital advertising. Okay, so now here's sort of the main tool that I'm going to show you. And let me just quickly check some of the questions here to see if we had any related to this. So somebody was asking, where did I get the $550 billion estimate on digital advertising? I used to have an older number there that was lower, and they mentioned that they have seen it estimated at 350 billion and as high as 650. I used to have a lower number in there, but I updated it earlier this year as the year changed because usually the analysts come out with new estimates. And so the answer is, I looked at a bunch of the different digital advertising estimates to see where they're at. There isn't one universally recognized number, but it is in the hundreds of billions of dollars for sure. And somebody had asked about, the idea of mindset being more important. What I mean by that is, if you know how to use the tools, that's great, but it's like, what are the tools telling you? And why are you using this tool in this moment? What is the reason? What is it going to tell you if you do that? And so the point here is to have the right mindset, your approach to it, the way you think about this information, and the way you say, okay, so I found a bunch of websites on the same IP. What would I want to do next to figure out if there are connections between them? Understanding what steps you want to take and understanding what the information is and isn't telling you is about how you process this information. And as journalists, at the end of the day, we're only as good as how well we process the information we gather, right? We could visit a lot of websites, we could interview a lot of people, but then we have to bring it all together and understand how it fits. And so I just want to emphasize that that thought process is still more important than any tools or techniques or things like that. Somebody said, not wanting to derail the workshop, but we really have to fix the broken online ad ecosystem. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this workshop is because it is so broken and because there is so little scrutiny of it by journalists. If out of this workshop today, a few of you decide to spend a little more time learning about digital ads and maybe doing some stories about digital ads, this is one of the ways we can fix this ecosystem. So I agree with that sentiment, and it definitely doesn't derail it. Okay, last one I'll do. Do you sometimes intentionally try to trick algorithms to get a specific ad? So there are times, for example, if I'm looking, I'll give you a specific example. We did a story about Steve Bannon's website, warroom.org. So this is a guy who, supports the January 6th, attempted insurrection. This is somebody who has talked about, putting the head of Anthony Fauci on a pike and these kinds of things. Really extreme kind of rhetoric. The kind of rhetoric that most advertisers don't want to be associated with at all. And so when we were looking at his site, we were trying to figure out, how is he making money because he'd been dropped by a bunch of places and who was still working with him. And so I was visiting the site. And I'm based in Canada, and I wanted to see what ads I was being shown because I was, pretty sure that none of the advertisers wanted to be associated with his site, which turned out to be the case. And so I visited, knowing that I was visiting from my Canadian IP address, which would cause ads, to be filtered in a certain way. And then I also visited using a VPN, and I could put my IP address in the US, and I could put it in different parts of the world in order to start getting different ads shown to me. And I had my colleague in our Washington office visit the site as well, and we had other people visit. And so I got a bunch of ads for cars and Etsy and places like that. And the guy in Washington, when he visited the site, he got an ad for Harvard. So in that sense, it's not that we were trying to trick it, but we were cognizant of the fact that different people coming from different devices with different amounts of cookies and a history were going to be shown different ads. And so using a VPN and other approaches and techniques, you can start to sort of get different ads showing and see what's there. And I didn't list it on here, but let me just note now, there is a service called Pathmatics, Pathmatics, Pathmatics. They do not give accounts to journalists for free, but if you are interested in a specific website and you contact them, hopefully they're not going to be mad at me for saying this, they will often pull a report for you of the ads that they have seen on a website. So rather than you doing your manual testing, you can potentially go to a service like Pathmatics. There's another one called Moat, M-O-A-T, and say, I'm a journalist, I'm interested in this website or these websites. Is it possible for you to give me a report of the ads that advertisers you have seen on this website over the last 6 months? And they will sometimes do that for you. So you can do your manual one, but there are tools that are trying to track advertiser presence. Pathmatics and Moat are probably the two best ones that I'm aware of, and they will often give you some feedback. All right, so the thing that I wanted to talk about now is ads.txt, okay? So I have some description here of it. You can come back and read this later. If this seems a bit weird or confusing right now, this is why I give you the slides. But here's the sort of overarching thing about this, is that publishers are supposed to have a list available on their website or in their mobile app that list all of the ad partners they work with, okay? And it can sometimes be insanely long. I'm going to show you an example of this in a second. And at the same time, all of these ad tech players, like Google and like others, are supposed to also list the sellers, the publishers they work with. And the lists of the publishers and the lists of the ad tech people are supposed to connect to each other. You're supposed to be able to see that, oh yeah, Maharlika News says that it works directly with Google, And this is its specific unique ID to Maharlika News. So each ad account in the system has a unique ID, which is good news for us. And then if you went to Google, and Google's what's called seller's JSON file, it should say, hey, we work with Maharlika News, and this is their ID number. The reason is to have a one-to-one mapping relationship, in particular to stop a practice called spoofing, where people were going and pretending to be like the Financial Times or the Guardian in these real-time auction environments, and having ads placed when the advertiser thought they were buying an ad on the Guardian or the Financial Times, when in fact it was just some piece of shit website somewhere that was pretending to be one of them. And this was a rampant problem. It was so bad that the Internet Advertising Bureau had to come up with a standard. Can you believe this? It's already a business, an industry doing hundreds of millions of dollars in business a year. And this was happening at such a scale that years later, they're like, okay, I guess we should probably fix this and come up with some solution. And by the way, it hasn't totally fixed it. I could go on about this, but I won't. The reason we care about this is a wonderful piece of transparency that is helpful for journalists, right? If we can go to a website and see them list all of the ad partners they work with, well, that maybe saves us a bit of time, and we can start to map that out a little bit. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to analyze ads.txt files, okay? And you can find them by going to a website. In this case, our test is going to be a website called thedailycentury.net. It's thedailycentury.net/ads.txt. Not every website has this, particularly really small ones. They won't bother to do it. But if you are investigating a website, you should always look at its ad.txt file, okay? And the tool that we are going to use to analyze ad.txt files is called well-known.dev. Free tool, completely free. You need to sign up for a free account, okay? You see more data if you sign up for a free account. I know the guy who runs this site. He's a very nice developer based in Singapore. He's not going to steal your info. It's totally cool. And if you are confused by what you're seeing, he will 100% talk to you and help you. His name is Braden, great guy. Okay. So we are going to be talking about ads.txt file. So here's an example for Maharlika News. This is its ads.txt file. Pretty simple, right? They list Google. They list that pub number there. That is the publisher ID. So that is the unique ID for the ad, this specific ad account. So this publisher is saying, this is our unique ad account. It's pub dash all of that. And then it's labeled direct. And this is important. Direct is the publisher saying, we work directly with Google. There is no intermediary. There is no third party, because publishers often work with agencies or other kinds of what are called rep houses to help represent their ad inventory and get ads placed. So you will see, and we'll look in a second, you will see ads.txt records where they list tons of they have a few direct and many reseller accounts. The resellers are like, hey, we work with, through these guys, they can represent us, but we don't work directly with them. They can sell on our behalf, okay? We care most about direct records because that's a publisher and an ad tech entity having a direct relationship, okay? Maharlika News, very simple, one entry. Here's Daily Century, a little bit more involved. So we see they've got a Taboola direct, and there's the Taboola account, 1173431. That should be, if it is a direct account, that should be their account number, nobody else's. It should belong to the dailycentury.net and whoever's behind it. And then we see a bunch of reseller accounts. And those reseller ones are less interesting because there could be tens, hundreds, thousands of different publishers who are also being represented by that same reseller, okay? That is the equivalent of the IP address thing, where it's like, if you click on the IP address and there's hundreds or thousands of sites, it's the same thing with a reseller ID. It's like, there's probably not necessarily a connection with all of the different sites and that ID. And then we see at the very bottom, they've got a Google as well. A lot of websites will have a direct Google ID because, again, Google is dominant and they want to be working with Google. You often earn more money with Google. Here is, so there's our two direct ones. We pay close attention. And then here's just another one I wanted to show you. This is not an abnormal ads.txt record. I mean, it's a fucking mess, but it's not abnormal in this world, okay? So this is a site called itsthevibe.com, which is a site that buys traffic to its website in order to monetize that traffic. It's an arbitrage play. They basically buy ads on other websites to get people to click on them to come to its websites to earn more money from those ads. And so in order to execute a strategy like that, you need to have a lot of expertise in advertising technology about how to get the most money out of the ads on your site, and you need to work with a lot of ad partners. And so in this case, they're listing all of the different partners they work with, and you can see that really the majority of them tend to be resellers. But as we'll see in a second, people will often mislabel stuff in their ads.txt record. It's actually a chronic problem that people are mislabeling things as direct that are actually reseller. We won't go down the rabbit hole on that, but just the usual thing, don't take an ads.txt file as the gospel. Things can be mislabeled, things can be incorrect in them, but knowing how to read them helps us kind of identify those things. All right, so let's go to wellknown.dev, let's enter the dailysentry.net, and let's see what it can do. Basically, it is a really much user-friendly way of reading an ads.txt file, and we'll point out some things that are interesting to us. So what you'll get as a result is it shows, yes, they have scanned the ads.txt file. You can see that it was most recently scanned on April 2nd, it looks like. So this is a site that is constantly scanning and rescanning ads.txt files of millions and millions and millions of websites. It is possible that you will enter a website and they won't have scanned it yet, but you can actually request that they scan it for you, okay? And then it'll be added to the database and they'll keep going. If we click on that ads.txt link, this is the display we get. So once again, it has sort of extracted and said, okay, we see two direct records in the ads.txt file, which is what we saw, if you remember. There was one for Google and one for Taboola. And this is what they're telling us there. So we can, once we're in well-known, we can click on that publisher ID, and sometimes you get lucky and there's a name or a company associated with it. But that is rare because the vast majority of publisher IDs linked with Google are confidential, as you'll see being labeled here. Google does not require its publishing partners to disclose their company name in these records. This is a point of a little bit of dispute because there isn't really a reason why they shouldn't have to do this, but Google does not require it. And so I think it's maybe about 10% or 15% of publishers who do. So if you go to well-known and you click on a Google ID and you get a company name or a person name, you're fortunate, you're lucky. It's always worth checking. It's kind of like the odds with a Whois search. Sometimes you get lucky and it's there. But we can also click on next to the pub ID, you can see there's numbers in brackets there. So this is only the data you only get if you are signed in. This is again why you need a free account there. So this is well-known telling us, hey, we're aware of 3 other websites that have this exact same publisher ID. So wellknown.dev is connecting websites together for us based on its analysis of ads.txt files. And it's completely normal for multiple websites to have the same Google publisher ID. If I'm a company and I have 10 websites that we run, I'm probably going to have all of my 10 websites using the same publisher ID. And in fact, publishers will often have multiple IDs at certain times, but it is very common to see more than one connected, but it's also a really good signal for us as journalists that, hey, these websites share a advertising ID, which means the money is flowing to the same account, which means there's probably a strong likelihood that these websites are run by the same entity or have some strong connection together. So that little 3 is good news for us. That tells us that, hey, dailysentry.net seems to be part of a network. And if we click on that, it shows us that the ads.txt files for newsspy.net, tfnpress.com have the exact same Google ID in it. So this is now, we would put this on our list of, I should go visit these other 2 websites and I should figure out what their content is and if there are any other indicators that I can stack on top of this to show that they are all connected to the same person. There's also a Taboola ID, right? So we can click on that and we get a name. We get a person's name, Ray Ann DeGio. So, different networks, Taboola, Google, what have you, have different likelihood of giving you a name. Wellknown.dev will show that name if it is there to be shown. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. I don't know the stats on Taboola because I've been doing more analysis of Google's sellers JSON, but sometimes you will get a name, and obviously that's very helpful. This is a name entered into the advertising ecosystem, and so the chances that this person or this company is linked with this are pretty good because money is changing hands, and people don't mess around when money is changing hands, right? They tend to want the money to go to the right place, which is why sites that are unconnected typically don't give someone else's publisher ID and let their money go to someone else, right? That wouldn't really make a lot of sense. And so that's how we start to navigate through well-known dev. We click on the IDs of the ad IDs, the seller ID, to sort of see is there a name. And then we can also click on the bracketed numbers to see which other websites list the same information in their ads.txt. So that's like the foundational simple thing that you always want to be doing. You're interested in a website, you can go to put it in wellknown.dev. You can see what are the direct relationships there, the records. You look at those IDs, you look at how many other sites might have it, and you can start to potentially build a network just from that. Really, really simple and straightforward. I gave you all this preamble, but all you need to do is when you're interested in a website, go to wellknown.dev, put it in there, and look at its direct records, okay? That is the simple takeaway from that, but it's good to have the context of what the hell's going on with all this stuff. Now, this isn't the only information that you get in a well-known record. It is probably the most useful in terms of connecting things together and seeing who's behind it. And just to close the loop on Taboola, Taboola lists one of those other sites. So we can see that TFN Press uses the same Taboola ad ID and uses the same Google ad ID. So these are sites that have two of the exact same ad IDs on them. Chances of them being connected are pretty good, but we obviously want to continue to do more work, right? And so that's helpful and really simple, really fast and easy way of discovering that. Okay, so what else is shown in a record on well-known? You also get the resellers. So if you remember when we looked at the Daily Century ads.txt file, we saw the two directs, and then we saw all these resellers. So this is well-known's rendering of all those resellers. And sometimes you will see a little bracket number after the ad ID. Typically that number is going to be very high because they are reseller records, right? And because they're reseller records, you have many publishers, many sites who are all using the same one. The indicators are not as strong around those. But the thing that's helpful about the reseller record is it starts to help us understand how many different ad tech companies they're working with, and sort of what is the nature of that relationship. Okay, so let me dive in and explain that a little bit more. So if you remember, Criteo was the one that had served us an ad, right? They had placed that ad, and Criteo is not actually listed on the resellers. So I just want to make the point, again, that sometimes the data that you see here is going to be mislabeled or incorrect. Intentionally? Yes. Sometimes. Unintentionally? Yes. Sometimes. You have to do more reporting to find out. But there's also, as always, the information you don't see. We know Criteo is working with this website because it helped place an ad, and yet Criteo is not represented properly in its ad.txt file. I don't think they're trying to hide that, but it's something that if we only looked at the ads.txt and didn't do our manual visit to the site, we wouldn't know, right? So this is where well-known is a great tool, but it's not the only thing we should be doing. We still need to do our manual investigation. We still need to look at it. Okay, so just a little point on that. So the thing that I see when I look at this reseller record list is that everything is connected to Taboola except for one entry there, right? One thing stands out. And the background on everything being connected to Taboola is basically these are all of the different ad tech partners that through Taboola are able to place ads on the dailycentury.net. So if you are an advertiser who is placing ads through the Taboola network, or you're placing ads through some of these other ones like OpenX or Context Web and on and on and on, this could end up on the dailycentury.net. Taboola is basically like, it's like this. I should have thought of a better analogy of this beforehand. So here's what I'm going to throw out off the top of my head. So it's like Taboola is like an open funnel, and then there's all these other funnels that can send, in this case, ad dollars through Taboola to reach the dailycentury.net. So there are so many different ways for ads through the Taboola relationship to appear on the dailycentury.net. And so this is telling us there's lots of different ways to get ads through there. But there's this one other company. And if we were really interested in the dailycentury.net, we'd try to figure out, well, what is the nature of this relationship? Is the dailycentury.net working with CL Media Holdings LLC and Whiskey Media? Is this mislabeled? Like, it could be any of those things. And so here's the other thing that well-known.dev tries to sort of explain to us. I'm going to stand up for this, because this is confusing to look at, I know. All right. So this is called a supply graph. And what it's supposed to be doing is showing us whether the relationships are properly being rendered between a publisher and all of its ad partners. There's not a live stream that I'm losing right now, is there? I don't think so. Okay. So you have the dailycentury.net. This is a direct relationship arrow in green. It has a direct relationship with Taboola. Right, we know that. And then Taboola, for all these resellers, this is a reseller relationship. So that represents visually what we saw in the ads.txt file, right? But then we're trying to figure out what's going on with Wild Sky Media, right? Because they're listed in that reseller record, but there's not really an obvious connection. And what this graph helps us understand is that, there is no direct connection between Daily Century and Wild Sky. It's only through this reseller record, and it's kind of a broken connection. And so it's an unresolved broken connection. And in fact, they're even saying that the dailycentury.net and Google is a bit unresolved. Why are there question marks there? My understanding is there's question marks there because Google, in its list of all the publishers it works with, does not list the dailycentury.net. So you have Google breaking a relationship that exists. You have these guys listing a relationship that's kind of doesn't make any sense. And this, in a nutshell, is like how confusing and messed up digital advertising is. You have a standard created to create transparency, and it's still kind of broken and creating strange scenarios. So if we wanted to understand a bit more, we can obviously reach out to the companies and talk to them, right? Like, none of this work replaces talking to people and reaching out. Wild Sky Media is a company, these are their brands. So it's possible at some point they had a relationship and were helping place ads on the Daily Century, but we cannot tell what was going on just by these records alone. We would have to do other kinds of reporting to figure that out, okay? Are they an old partner? Are they a current partner? Is it mislabeled? I don't know the answer. But these are the kinds of things that, depending on what you're trying to figure out and why you started looking at this website in the first place, it may be important or it may not be important to you. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. I'm sure your heads are spinning of all this ads.txt stuff. But these are just a few other tips here around ads. Just to note, SimilarWeb can tell you if, for example, a website gets a lot of traffic from ads, which would be an indication that it's buying its traffic by placing ads elsewhere. Adbeat.com, if you want to get a sense of the ads that a particular website is placing, you can try it on adbeat.com, which is free. If you want a more detailed report, Pathmatics or Moat are your best options for that. But Adbeat, and I did put Pathmatics there, but look, I misspelled it. That was great. And so just talking about using a VPN to sort of change and look around if you want to see the ads there. Okay, so let me go to Slido. Thank you for our last few minutes here. All right. So let's see. Are there scammy ad networks that specifically work with shady advertisers, who wouldn't mind appearing on disinfo sites and that kind of thing? I mean, the short answer is yes. There are ad networks there are, I don't know, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of ad networks out there. There are ad networks that specialize in everything you could think of. But let's take, in this realm of scams, there are ad networks that specialize in crypto offers, for example, okay? And these are networks that are working with crypto advertisers. They do not care if it's a legitimate crypto investment or not. What they are trying to do is find, get the crypto thing, find the people to, put it out in email ads, to put it on website ads, to drive the conversions and sales to the crypto offer. They don't care if it's a scam at all. So there are absolutely shady ad networks out there. If you were interested in, avenues for investigation, think about finding a specialized ad network in that particular niche that might be working there, because they escape scrutiny almost every time. Because usually what they say is, oh God, we didn't realize this was a scam Bitcoin offer. We're shocked. Okay, we won't work with them anymore. 6 months later, they go work with them again. They don't care because they never get any scrutiny. When like the FTC in the US goes after these kinds of scammers, ad networks are almost never being hit with fines because they just pretend like, well, we're just a dumb pipe. We didn't know that it was a scam. Okay. Can digital ads be a way to illegally fund political parties? Digital ads have been extremely effective for political fundraising. In fact, if you look at Facebook, I think one of the best uses for Facebook ads is absolutely like, one, capturing emails of potential supporters and people like that with sort of, kind of often borderline scammy, clickbaity things. And then also to generate fundraising, for sure. The digital ad engine for campaigns in many countries is one of the most dominant ways that they start building their lists for contacting people to do fundraising. And I would absolutely say that, in your toolkit of things you look at when you're doing election coverage, paying attention to the digital ads that are being placed. Facebook has rules around that, and Facebook fortunately gives a transparent ad library, which a lot of other platforms don't have. But obviously not every political ad ends up in that library, so there's often things that are incomplete. But people don't pay enough attention to email ads and offers because it's kind of harder to track those. So you should be, signing up for lots of lists and seeing what ads and sort of pleas are sent out to you, and looking across platforms for that. I think it's a really underlooked at area. Is there a way to check in bulk what ads are appearing on a website? That definitely is where a Pathmatics or an AdBeat can be helpful, or not AdBeat, sorry. AdBeat tells you the ads that a particular website is placing, but Pathmatics or Moat will tell you the ads that are appearing on a particular website. So if you want to do bulk analysis, that's where you need to go and ask them for data. What agency does a website have on the specific ads that show up on it? Good question. So I talked earlier about how brands often have rules of where their ads should appear and shouldn't appear, and how it's often still happening. Similarly, publishers do have rules about the kinds of ads that they will and won't accept, and they're supposed to be able to encode those rules in the partners that they're working with. But listen, a lot of stuff slips through the cracks. And as much as publishers may have very good, saying, for example, we don't want any crypto ads, the fact is they are still reliant on technology to detect the crypto ads and keep them off the site. And so stuff slips through all the time. Sometimes there's intentional stuff. Sometimes it just slips through because the technology they're using to detect it is ineffective. But one of the overarching themes is opacity, incompleteness, opportunities for corruption and fraud, and then also stuff not working the way everybody says it's actually working. And that is just happening all the time. Okay, so I think we're out of time. I know I threw a lot of info at you. The slides also have linked to these 2 resources, which have some additional stuff related to these types of investigations. Again, there's today's slides that you should go over and look at. And hopefully this is helpful for you in your investigations, and I'm very happy if you want to reach out to me and talk to me if I can be helpful as you dig in, particularly on ad stuff. It's a big focus for me this year, and if there's opportunities for collaboration or just for me to help, I'm happy to do that. So thank you very much. Good thing we started early.